Eli Strand had attended exactly 43 ceremonial events in his 9 months as cultural attaché to the Velthara Empire, and he'd learned that the secret to survival was mastering the art of being present without being noticed. Stand in the designated observation area, take notes that no one would ever read, nod at appropriate moments, and absolutely do not draw attention to yourself. The Velthara were gracious hosts in the way powerful civilizations could afford to be. They tolerated human presence because diplomacy required it, but that didn't mean they particularly wanted humans participating. Today's ceremony was the Sword of Claiming, an annual ritual Eli had read about but never witnessed. He stood in the observation section of the Grand Throne Room, a space so architecturally impressive it made human cathedrals look like storage sheds, watching as Velthara warriors lined up to attempt what no one had accomplished in 1,000 years. The sword itself rested in a stone platform at the center of the chamber, blade embedded so deeply that centuries of legendary fighters hadn't moved it. The metal caught the light from crystalline ceiling fixtures, inscribed with characters that seemed to shift when viewed directly. Beautiful, ancient, and apparently extremely stuck, Queen Cyrenish presided from her throne, and Eli had to admit she was striking, even by Velthara standards, which set the bar pretty high. Her long ears swept back in an elegant curve, decorated with rings that denoted her lineage and authority. Her eyes were the color of polished steel, sharp and assessing. She wore formal robes that managed to look simultaneously ceremonial and vaguely threatening, and her expression suggested she'd rather be literally anywhere else. Eli understood that feeling completely. The ceremony proceeded with predictable rhythm. A warrior would approach, grasp the sword, strain dramatically, and fail. The crowd would murmur sympathetically. The warrior would bow to the queen and retreat. Repeat. It was like watching the universe's most formal and least productive workout routine. And that concludes the claiming ceremony. The master of rituals announced in Velthara, the translator in Eli's ear rendering it into flat standard. Once again, the sword remains unclaimed. May it wait for the destined moment when— "Excuse me," Eli heard himself say, which was definitely not part of his survival strategy. The entire chamber turned to look at him. Hundreds of Velthara nobles, warriors, and court officials, all suddenly very aware of the human attaché who just interrupted a sacred ritual. The master of rituals looked personally offended. Yes. Is the ceremony open to all species or only Velthara? Eli's brain was screaming at him to shut up, but his mouth had apparently declared independence. The ancient texts specify all who would claim the blade, but so technically anyone can attempt it. The queen leaned forward slightly, her expression shifting from bored to genuinely curious. When she spoke, her voice carried across the chamber with natural authority. The human attaché wishes to try. You, who can barely lift our training weapons, believe you can draw a blade that has defeated our greatest warriors for a millennium. Her tone wasn't hostile exactly, just amused. Like she was watching a child insist they could reach the top shelf. Eli should have backed down, should have claimed it was just academic curiosity, should have remembered that his entire job was not drawing attention. Instead, he said, "Probably not, but tradition says anyone can attempt and I'm curious." The court erupted in laughter. Not cruel, necessarily, but the kind of amusement reserved for someone doing something adorably foolish. The queen's mouth twitched, fighting a smile. "Very well," she said, her tone making it clear she was granting this for entertainment value. "The human may attempt the sword of claiming. After all, we could all use some levity after such a serious ceremony." More laughter. Eli felt his face heat but forced himself to walk forward. He'd committed now. Might as well see it through. The stone platform was waist-high, the sword embedded at a slight angle. Up close, it was even more impressive, perfect craftsmanship, the kind of weapon that looked like it had been made by someone who understood violence as an art form. The grip was wrapped in material that might have been leather or might have been something biological. Hard to tell with Velthara design. Behind him, he could hear the whispers, the barely suppressed mockery. Someone called out in Velthara, which his translator rendered as, "Should we fetch a ladder for the human? He looks lost." Another voice, "Perhaps we should prepare the medical bay. He might strain something." The queen watched from her throne, her expression that particular kind of entertained patience adults show when indulging children's impossible requests. Eli wrapped his hands around the sword's grip. The metal was cool, smooth, and the moment he touched it something happened. A vibration, a hum, something he felt in his bones rather than heard. The laughter in the chamber faded slightly. He pulled. The sword didn't move. He adjusted his grip, planted his feet more firmly, pulled harder. Nothing. The blade might as well have been part of the stone itself. The laughter returned, louder now. Someone made a comment about human strength that the translator politely declined to render into standard. Eli could see the queen's expression, amused tolerance mixed with second-hand embarrassment, like she was already composing whatever diplomatic platitude she'd offer when he gave up. But then Eli stopped trying to force it. He remembered something from his cultural studies. Velthara philosophy emphasized balance over strength, acceptance over domination, partnership over conquest. Their entire civilization was built on the principle that true power came from working with forces rather than against them. What if the sword wasn't testing strength? What if it was testing something else entirely? He relaxed his grip slightly, stopped pulling against the stone, stopped trying to dominate it. Instead, he pulled with it, not commanding but asking. Like coaxing instead of forcing, like partnership instead of conquest. The sword slid free. Smooth, effortless, like it had never been stuck at all. The blade caught the light as it came up, ringing with a sound like crystal breaking, pure and clear and impossible. The chamber fell into absolute silence. Eli stood there, holding the legendary sword, feeling its weight, lighter than he'd expected, perfectly balanced, warm in his hands like it was alive. He stared at it, his brain trying to process what had just happened, and slowly turned to face the court. Hundreds of Velthara stared back, warriors with their mouths open, nobles frozen mid-whisper, court officials looking like they just watched the laws of physics take a vacation. And on her throne, Queen Cyrenish had gone completely still. Her expression cycled through disbelief, shock, and something that might have been horror. Someone in the back of the chamber spoke, their voice trembling. "The consort of destiny has been chosen." The words seemed to break the spell. The chamber erupted into chaos, voices shouting in Velthara too fast for Eli's translator to keep up, warriors rushing forward, nobles gesturing frantically. The master of rituals looked like he was having a personal crisis. Eli stood in the center of it all, holding a sword that apparently shouldn't have moved, and wondered if this was what diplomatic incidents felt like from the inside. The queen rose from her throne, and the chamber fell silent again. She descended the steps with measured grace, moving through the crowd that parted instantly, and approached Eli. Up close her eyes were even more intense, steel gray with flecks of something darker, currently locked on him with an expression he couldn't read. "You drew the sword," she said, her voice carefully controlled. "Yeah. I'm as surprised as you are." "That is unlikely." She looked at the blade in his hands, then at the empty stone platform, then back at him. "Do you understand what you have done? Probably ruined my career as a cultural observer. You have invoked the oldest law in our empire. The sword of claiming chooses the consort of destiny, the one meant to stand beside the throne as partner and protector." Her voice was still controlled, but something underneath suggested she was barely containing either fury or panic. "By drawing this blade, you are now bound to me, betrothed. By tradition older than this empire, witnessed by my entire court." Eli felt the bottom drop out of his stomach. "I'm sorry, what?" "Congratulations, Eli Strand. You are engaged to the queen of the Velthara Empire." Her smile was sharp enough to cut. I do hope you find that more entertaining than I currently do." Behind her, the court had descended into barely controlled chaos. And Eli, still holding the sword that had just destroyed his quiet life, realized he'd just participated in the universe's most consequential case of curiosity killing the cat. Or in this case, making the cat accidentally royal. The next 3 hours were a blur of frantic explanations, emergency meetings, and approximately 7 different people telling Eli he just created a diplomatic crisis of unprecedented proportions. He'd been escorted to a private chamber, for his safety, they said, though it felt suspiciously like being detained, and told to wait while the court figured out what to do with him. The sword sat on a table nearby. It hadn't disappeared or revealed itself as a fake. Just sat there, looking expensive and historically significant, mocking him with its continued existence. Human Ambassador Morgan Reeves arrived like a tactical strike, precisely timed, maximum impact. She was a veteran diplomat who'd spent 15 years navigating Velthara politics, and she looked at Eli the way a general might look at a soldier who'd accidentally bombed their own headquarters. "Explain," she said, not bothering with preliminaries. "I touched a sword, it came out. Apparently that's legally binding. You drew the sword of claiming, which hasn't been moved in 1,000 years, in front of the entire Velthara royal court, thereby invoking ancient law that names you consort of destiny to Queen Cyrenish." Reeves paced, her movements sharp with barely contained stress. "Do you understand what that means? You're not just engaged. You're politically bound to the most powerful monarch in 3 sectors. You've violated approximately 17 protocols about unauthorized entanglements. Human command is demanding you relinquish the sword, claim it was a misunderstanding, and dissolve this betrothal before it becomes a crisis." "Can I do that?" "According to Velthara tradition, no, the sword chooses. The choice is binding. You can't just put it back and pretend it didn't happen." She stopped pacing, faced him directly. "But politically, we need you to try. Claim accident, cultural confusion, anything that lets the queen declare the ceremony void and return things to normal." "What does she want?" "That's complicated." Reeves pulled up a datapad showing reports that made Eli's head hurt. "The court is divided. Traditionalists say the ceremony is sacred and must be honored regardless of species. Pragmatists say a human consort is impossible and the ritual must be declared invalid. And there's a third faction, quietly but dangerously, already plotting to eliminate you before the betrothal can be formalized." Eli felt cold. "Eliminate me." Dead consort claimant means the bond dissolves, and the sword returns to its stone. Clean, traditional, and far less complicated than accepting a human into the royal line. Reeves sat down, suddenly looking tired. "Eli, you're a good attaché. You understand Velthara culture better than most humans. But this is beyond your scope. You need to refuse the bond, let the queen find a diplomatic out, and return to your actual job before someone decides assassination is simpler than politics." "And what happens to her?" "She's the queen, she'll manage." "Will she?" Eli thought about Cyrenish's expression when the sword came free. Shock, yes, but also something else. Something that looked almost like desperate hope before it was buried under royal composure. "Reeves, the consort of destiny isn't just ceremonial, is it?" Reeves hesitated. "No, it's foundational. Velthara monarchy is structured around partnership. The ruler provides vision and authority, the consort provides balance and perspective. It's why the sword exists, to choose someone who can stand as equal rather than subordinate. Cyrenish has been ruling alone for 3 years since her predecessor died without naming a consort. She's held everything together through political brilliance, but she's exhausted." "Yes," Reeves looked at him. "Which is why she needs a proper consort, someone from a noble house, trained in governance, who understands Velthara power structures. Not a human attaché who got curious about a sword." Before Eli could respond, the door opened and a Velthara official entered, older, wearing robes that suggested high rank. He bowed slightly to Reeves, then addressed Eli in careful standard. "The Queen summons you. Private audience, come." Reeves stood. "I should accompany." The Queen said alone. The official's tone left no room for argument. Eli grabbed the sword. It felt wrong to leave it, and followed the official through corridors that grew progressively quieter and more heavily guarded. They reached a door that looked both ancient and reinforced, which the official opened before bowing and retreating. Eli stepped through into what was clearly the Queen's private chambers. The space was smaller than he'd expected, less throne room and more personal study. Maps covered one wall, strategic documents another. Weapons were displayed with clear respect for their history. And near the window, looking out over the city, stood Queen Cyrenish. She'd changed from ceremonial robes into something simpler, though still clearly expensive. Without the court watching, she looked less intimidating and more tired. She didn't turn when he entered, just spoke to the window. "Close the door, dismiss the guards, I want privacy." But Eli did as ordered, hearing the heavy click of locks engaging. When he turned back, she was finally looking at him, and her expression was cold fury barely contained. "You have destroyed my carefully maintained political balance. Do you understand that? I didn't expect to actually draw the sword. Your expectations are irrelevant." She moved away from the window, her grace making it look like she was gliding rather than walking. "By drawing the blade, you invoked ancient law that supersedes even my authority. I cannot refuse the bond without rejecting tradition, which gives my enemies grounds to challenge my legitimacy. I cannot accept the bond without binding myself to a human who knows nothing of governance, who has no political power, who will be seen by half my nobles as contamination of the royal line." She stopped in front of him. "I am trapped by tradition, and it is your fault." Eli forced himself to hold her gaze. "What do you want me to do?" The practical answer: claim the drawing was accident, relinquish the sword. Allow me to declare the ceremony void due to cultural misunderstanding. Return to your attaché duties and let me manage the political fallout. Her voice was controlled, precise, and utterly exhausted underneath. And the impractical answer? She was quiet for a long moment. The impractical answer is that I have been ruling alone for 3 years, holding this empire together through strategy and compromise and endless political maneuvering. The consort of destiny is meant to be my equal partner, not subordinate. Someone who can challenge my decisions, offer perspectives I lack, stand beside me rather than behind me. Her composure cracked slightly. I have watched warriors attempt that sword for 3 years, hoping someone worthy would succeed, someone who could share this impossible burden. And then you, a human attaché who barely speaks our language, approached it with curiosity instead of conquest and succeeded where legends failed. But I'm not a warrior. No, you are something the sword apparently valued more. She took the blade from his hands, examining it with something like reverence. Velthara philosophy teaches that true strength is balance, not domination. I do not know how to accept one, especially one whose presence will cause half my court to question my judgment. She looked at him. But perhaps we determine that together, if you are willing. But before Eli could answer, alarms shrieked through the chamber. The door burst open and the Queen's head of security rushed through, her expression grim. "Your Majesty, we have confirmation of an assassination plot. 3 noble houses have coordinated. Attackers are moving through the palace. They're targeting the human." Cyrenish's entire demeanor shifted, exhaustion vanishing, replaced by cold military precision. "Lockdown protocols. Rally my guards, find the attackers and—" "They've bypassed primary security. They're already in this wing. You have minutes at most." The Queen grabbed Eli's arm, pulling him away from the door. "How many?" "6 confirmed, elite fighters. House Torval, House Kermish, House Beltura. All 3, that's a formal alliance against the throne." Cyrenish's eyes were steel, calculating. She looked at Eli. "Can you fight?" "Not even a little bit." "Unfortunate." The consort of destiny is meant to be my champion, the one who stands with me when threats emerge, but we work with what we have. She moved to her weapons display, grabbing 2 blades with practiced efficiency. Stay behind me. Follow my orders exactly. And if I tell you to run, you run. Understood? What about you? I am the queen. I do not run. She handed him the sword of claiming. If you truly drew this blade, if it truly chose you, then prove it. Stand with me, fight with me. Show me the sword chose correctly. The door exploded inward. 6 Velthara warriors poured through, armored, armed, moving with the coordinated precision of people who'd trained together. They spread out immediately, cutting off escape routes, weapons raised. The lead warrior spoke in formal Velthara. Queen Cyrenish, step aside. Our business is with the human who dishonors your throne by claiming the sacred blade. You breach my private chambers, threaten my chosen consort, attack the throne itself. Cyrenish's voice was ice. Your business is treason and the penalty is death. Her guards burst through side entrances, weapons drawn, and the chamber erupted into violence. Eli had never been in combat, had spent his entire career avoiding exactly this kind of situation. But he was holding the sword of claiming, and Cyrenish was fighting beside him, and somehow that made running feel impossible. He followed her movements, not trying to fight but trying not to be a liability. When she moved left, he moved right. When she engaged an attacker, he created distance. When one warrior broke through toward him, Eli did the only thing he could think of. He used the sword defensively, blocking rather than attacking, creating enough delay for Cyrenish's guards to intervene. It was chaos. It was terrifying. And somehow, improbably, they were winning. The last attacker fell, subdued by the queen's guards. Cyrenish stood over them, breathing hard, her blade still raised, looking every inch the warrior queen her propaganda claimed. Then she turned to Eli and her expression softened just slightly. You stayed. You told me to. I told you to follow orders. Most people in their first combat freeze or panic. She approached him, took the sword of claiming from his shaking hands. You stayed. You followed commands. You created opportunities instead of trying to be a hero. She smiled, small, genuine, the first real warmth he'd seen from her. That is what a consort does. Stands with their partner even when the odds are impossible, trusts even when terrified. The sword chose correctly. Eli felt dizzy. Adrenaline crash mixing with the surreal realization that he'd just survived an assassination attempt, and apparently passed some kind of test he hadn't known he was taking. What happens now? Cyrenish looked at the subdued attackers, at her guards securing the chamber, at the sword of claiming she still held. Now we formalize the betrothal. Because if 3 noble houses were willing to coordinate assassination rather than accept you, that means your presence threatens their power structures more than they anticipated. And anything that threatens entrenched power this much is worth protecting. She looked at him directly. If you are willing, I will not force this bond if you truly wish to refuse it. Eli thought about Ambassador Reeves's advice to walk away. About the political complications, the danger, the impossibility of being consort to an alien queen he barely knew. About 9 months of careful observation and deliberate invisibility, all destroyed by one moment of curiosity. He thought about Cyrenish fighting beside him, trusting him to follow orders despite having no training. About her exhaustion when she thought no one was watching. About a sword that had waited 1,000 years for someone who understood that asking was stronger than demanding. I'm willing, he said. I have no idea what I'm doing and I'm probably going to mess this up regularly, but I'm willing to try. Something in her expression shifted. Relief, maybe, or hope, or something more complicated. Then we do this together, figure it out as we go, make mistakes and correct them. Build partnership instead of pretending it exists automatically. She handed him the sword back. Welcome to the most complicated job in the Empire, Eli Strand. Try not to get killed in your first week. I'll do my best. That, she said with the faintest hint of amusement, is all any consort can promise. The formal betrothal ceremony happened 3 days later, after security had been tripled, and the three treasonous noble houses had been dealt with in ways Eli decided not to ask about too carefully. The throne room was packed, Velthara nobility forced to witness what many of them clearly considered a travesty, human diplomats trying to project confidence while internally panicking, and media from 6 different species capturing every moment for historical record. Ambassador Reeves had stopped threatening to recall Eli and started briefing him on diplomatic protocols with the grim efficiency of someone who'd accepted the inevitable. "You're about to become the most scrutinized human in 3 sectors," she'd warned. "Every decision you make will be analyzed. Every word you speak will be interpreted as policy. Try not to start any wars accidentally." No pressure. All the pressure, but you drew the sword, so apparently you can handle it. The ceremony itself was surprisingly brief. Formal declarations in Velthara that Eli's translator rendered into standard. The presentation of the sword of claiming as symbol of the bond, and Cyrenish's official acknowledgement of him as consort of destiny. She wore full ceremonial regalia that made her look simultaneously regal and intimidating, and when she spoke the binding words, her voice carried across the chamber with absolute authority. "By ancient law and sacred tradition, I accept Eli Strand as my chosen consort, partner in governance, champion in conflict, equal in all matters of state. Let those who would challenge this bond know they challenge the throne itself." It was both a declaration and a warning. Eli could see some nobles bristling, others calculating, a few looking genuinely intrigued. Then it was his turn. The master of rituals had coached him through the response, formal Velthara phrases he'd practiced, until his pronunciation was acceptable if not perfect. He stepped forward, very aware of hundreds of eyes on him, and spoke the words that would bind him to this impossible role. "I accept the honor and burden of standing beside the throne. I pledge my service, my counsel, and my partnership to Queen Cyrenish and the Velthara Empire. I will stand when called, listen when needed, and speak truth even when difficult. This I vow before witnesses and history." The sword of claiming pulsed with faint light as he spoke, as if acknowledging the oath. Cyrenish took his hand, a gesture that was both ceremonial and somehow personal, and the bond was sealed. The chamber erupted in applause. Not universal, some nobles looked like they were clapping out of obligation rather than enthusiasm, but enough to be diplomatic. Afterward came the reception, which was exactly as awkward as Eli had anticipated. Velthara nobles approached with carefully neutral expressions, offering congratulations that ranged from genuine to obviously forced. Human diplomats tried to figure out how to navigate a situation where one of their attachés had become alien royalty. And through it all, Cyrenish moved with perfect grace, managing conversations and political implications with the skill of someone who'd been doing this her entire life. Eli stuck close to her, following her lead, trying not to embarrass himself or cause an incident. It was exhausting. Finally, mercifully, the reception ended and they retreated to what would apparently now be their shared quarters, a suite of rooms that was larger than Eli's entire previous living space and decorated with enough historical artifacts to stock a museum. Cyrenish dismissed her attendants, locked the doors, and immediately pulled off her ceremonial crown with obvious relief. "Finally, that was interminable. You seem to handle it fine." "I have had years of practice pretending formal events do not make me want to flee into the wilderness." She set the crown on a display stand with more force than necessary. "You did well." Several nobles commented that your Velthara pronunciation was surprisingly competent. "I had a good teacher. The master of rituals was very patient with my terrible accent. He was terrified you would mangle the sacred words and cause a diplomatic incident, but you surprised him." She moved to a seating area that looked comfortable despite being worth more than Eli's annual salary. "Sit. We should discuss practical matters before exhaustion claims us both. Eli sat, feeling the day catch up to him. Practical matters like what? Like the fact that we are now legally bonded but personally strangers. Like the political complications of a human consort that will occupy the next several months. Like how we build an actual partnership instead of just performing one for the court. She looked at him directly. I meant what I said during the assassination attempt. I need a partner, not a subordinate. Someone who will challenge my decisions when I am wrong, offer perspectives I lack, and stand as equal rather than ornament. Can you do that? I can try, but you'll have to teach me. I understand Velthara culture academically, but governance is different from observation. Then we teach each other. I will show you how the empire functions, how decisions are made, where power truly lies beneath the formal structures. You will show me how humans think, how your perspectives differ from ours, how to bridge gaps I may not even recognize exist. She paused, and we will be honest with each other, even when honesty is uncomfortable, especially then. Agreed. Eli hesitated. Can I ask you something? You are my consort. You can ask me anything. When I drew the sword before the shock set in, you looked almost hopeful. Why? Cyrenish was quiet for a long moment. Because I have been waiting 3 years for that sword to move. Watching warriors attempt it, hoping someone would succeed, someone who could share the impossible burden of ruling. And with each failure I felt more isolated, more alone, more trapped by a role I cannot escape but cannot fully succeed at without partnership. She met his eyes. When you drew that blade, for one moment before politics and complications crashed down, I felt relief. Someone had finally succeeded. Someone had been chosen. And maybe, just maybe, I would not have to face everything alone anymore. You won't, Eli said quietly. I'm here. I'm probably going to make mistakes, and I'm definitely out of my depth, but I'm here. For however long you'll have me. Something in her expression softened. Then perhaps we will manage this impossible situation after all. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, two people bound by ancient tradition and impossible circumstances, beginning to figure out what partnership actually meant. Weeks became months, months that transformed everything. Eli learned governance from the inside, sitting in on council meetings, watching Cyrenish navigate political minefields with surgical precision, offering human perspectives that sometimes shifted how she approached decisions. She taught him Velthara strategy, showed him where power truly flowed beneath formal hierarchies, trained him in combat forms so he could at least defend himself if necessary. He discovered she had a wicked sense of humor that emerged when the court wasn't watching, that she sang Velthara ballads while reviewing strategic documents, that she valued honesty more than agreement, and would rather be challenged than placated. She discovered he had an unexpected talent for reading people's motivations, that his human perspective often identified problems she'd missed due to cultural blind spots, that his tendency to ask, why, instead of accepting because tradition, sometimes revealed better solutions. They argued, frequently, about policy, about strategy, about whether certain traditions served the empire or merely served inertia. But the arguments were productive, two people with different perspectives working toward shared goals rather than fighting over dominance. The court watched, calculating. Some nobles grudgingly admitted the human consort offered value. Others remained hostile, looking for any excuse to undermine him. And a few, younger nobles, particularly, started questioning whether rigid tradition was truly strength or simply fear of change disguised as principle. Human-Velthara relations shifted. Seeing one of their own standing beside an alien queen made humans reconsider what cross-species cooperation could achieve. Seeing their queen accept a human consort made some Velthara reconsider whether strength required isolation. 6 months after drawing the sword, Eli sat in the throne room during a formal council session, listening to nobles debate trade policy. Cyrenish presided with her usual composure, but he'd learned to read the subtle signs. the slight tension in her shoulders that meant she was frustrated, the way her fingers tapped against her throne's armrest when she was calculating responses. The debate was going in circles, nobles protecting their economic interests while pretending to care about empire-wide prosperity. Finally, Eli leaned toward Cyrenius and spoke quietly, barely a whisper, but she heard. They're not arguing about trade, they're arguing about control. House Veltaris wants to maintain their shipping monopoly. House Carden wants to break it. Everything else is theater. Cyrenius's expression didn't change, but her finger-tapping stopped. She'd heard him, processed the information, and when she spoke, her voice cut through the debate like a blade. Enough. This council will not waste time on theatrical positioning disguised as policy debate. House Veltaris, you will open your shipping routes to competitive bidding or face regulatory review. House Carden, you will submit proper proposals through established channels instead of using council time for grandstanding. We reconvene in 3 days with actual solutions, not political theater. Dismissed. The nobles filed out, some looking satisfied, others frustrated, all aware that the queen had just cut through their carefully constructed arguments with surgical precision. When they were alone, Cyrenius looked at Eli. "Thank you." "For what?" "For seeing what I was too focused on formal protocols to recognize. For reminding me that sometimes the simplest analysis is the correct one." She smiled. "This is why the sword chose you. You see what others miss, because you are not blinded by tradition and expectation. Or I'm just better at recognizing political nonsense, because I've been on the outside watching it for years." "Perhaps both." She stood, moved to the window overlooking the city. 6 months ago, I mocked you for attempting the sword, dismissed you as curiosity and folly. I was certain you would fail, certain the ceremony would end as it always had, with the blade remaining unclaimed and me remaining alone. And now I am grateful you were foolish enough to try, grateful the sword was wise enough to choose you, grateful I was willing to see past my initial dismissal and recognize what you offered. She looked at him. "We are not what the prophecy expected, not what my court wanted, but we are what this empire needed, a partnership built on mutual respect rather than tradition, on complementary strengths rather than matching backgrounds. And that, I think, is worth more than 1,000 years of legendary warriors who understood conquest but not cooperation." Eli joined her at the window. The city spread below them, Velthara going about their lives, unaware that their queen and her unexpected human consort were quietly revolutionizing what governance could mean. "I'm still not sure I'm doing this right," he admitted. "Neither am I, but we are doing it together, and that makes all the difference." She took his hand, a gesture that had become familiar over months of partnership, both political and increasingly personal. "The sword chose correctly, Eli Strand. I doubted, I mocked, I resisted, but the sword was wiser than I was, and I am grateful for that wisdom every day. Even when I ask annoying questions about why certain traditions exist. Especially then." She smiled. "Someone needs to question whether we do things because they are effective or simply because we have always done them. You fulfill that role admirably." They stood there as the sun set over the city, casting everything in shades of amber and gold. Behind them, in the throne room, the sword of claiming rested in its place of honor, no longer embedded in stone, but displayed as the symbol of transformation it had always been meant to be. The sword that had waited 1,000 years for someone who understood that asking was stronger than demanding. That partnership was stronger than dominance. That sometimes the most revolutionary act was approaching the impossible with curiosity instead of conquest. And in choosing Eli Strand, human attaché, cultural observer, someone who'd never expected to be anything more than a footnote in diplomatic history, it had chosen exactly right. The empire was changing. Slowly, carefully, but changing. Young Velthara watched their queen work in partnership with a human and started questioning, whether strength truly required isolation. Human civilians saw one of their own standing beside an alien throne and reconsidered what cooperation across species could achieve. It wasn't perfect. There were still nobles who resented Eli's presence, still complications that arose from cross-species governance, still moments when the weight of what they'd built felt impossible to sustain. But standing there, hand in hand with